Graduated, elevated, now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time non-stop.
So in terms of vernacular then, I think I'm trying to get my head around it. What are your thoughts there?
Right. So in many ways, I feel that, and I have to check myself when I do it, that sometimes you're so used to using certain terminologies that you don't realize you become complicit in the structures which separate the center from the fringes, the center from the periphery. And vernacular is perhaps one of those terms, where it seems like vernacular is a second-class dialect or a second-class language to a more authoritative, a more representative, a more acceptable language. And this also happens within states. So like in India, you have official languages, and then you have several dialects which don't receive any state patronage in a way where the state itself, the Indian state, is signaling that these languages are not on the same pedestal, not worthy of the same sort of legal protection as our official languages. But I think with vernaculars in particular, it's a process of reclamation of space, reclamation of decision making. Because the reason why we think, at least to me, it seems like the reason why we think vernaculars are lower in status than other languages is because we've been conditioned to think that by English, by French, by Latin, which are seen as more privileged, but that's conditioning that we have received because we are here. And vernacular doesn't necessarily not have that currency. We deprived it of that currency. I think Homi Bhabha has this, Homi Bhabha's writing is just incredible on location of culture, where he speaks about this process of difference in equality through vernaculars, reclaiming vernaculars by emphasizing on the difference in equality. So we're all equals, but we're just different equals. So vernaculars are all equal, but they're just different equals, like other languages. So English is also a vernacular, like Tamil is, like Zulu is, like Swahili or Afrikaans. And it's about recognizing the difference, but the equality at the same time, I feel.
Interesting. So the last part of, when it comes to the first question that I did ask is anger. I mean, I've seen online in terms of movements, like for example, the feminist movement, you can see people are angry. And then in terms of Black Lives Matter, you can see that people are angry. So in your opinion, do you think when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, we are confusing ourselves as being a part of that group, and we are in this little box where we're confined, and our anger is not really helping us to educate, nor to change the stereotype, nor to encourage a positive colonial breakout, because you have to colonize in order for you to be heard, really, or manipulate, essentially. It's all about groupthink in terms of psychology. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I must admit that I have had quite a journey in terms of, what my own comfort is, my own relationship is with the process of decolonizing. And it came from a place where initially I thought of academic and personal as separate, as existing in silos, right? That I have my personal positionality, but my academic positionality is different. But as soon as I entered European institutions, I started to feel more and more angry. And I started to feel more and more that this separation that I had installed between academic and personal did not exist. It was all one and the same, because these institutions were also treating me as one and the same. I mean, in many ways, I was angry at first because I felt like I had to perform my colorness. I had to perform my color. For the university, it was helpful to say that, we have 3 people of color in our cohort. But then that meant that I had to behave like a person of color in a way that the university expected me. If a diversity committee is set up at my university, that burden falls on me to be part of this diversity committee. So in a way, you exist in these white spaces where you're going through microaggressions, macroaggressions daily, right? Yes. Living in white spaces is difficult. And then you are meant to be the face of the change as well. You are meant to initiate reform as well. And that made me angry because I was like, why is it that you shoulder the emotional labor of receiving abuse and then you also shoulder the emotional and physical labor of creating change and educating against that abuse? But as I started to spend more time here, I realized that it's actually movements outside of academia that from which we can derive solidarity. By treating academia as some sort of rarefied space, as some sort of space where we don't see those challenges, we are actually doing disservice both to our own challenges and to the broader movements. Academia is perhaps at the very high levels of the discriminatory structures that movements like Black Lives Matter are trying to critique. And you will see this. I mean, I as a brown person, I don't think as a brown person, first of all, I know how my own community, my own brethren afflict more racial violence on Black people. There are a zillion instances of this in India, in Uganda. I mean, everywhere you see the dynamics between people of color, which often just gets ignored abroad, ignored in like white discourse. But at the same time, you realize that the challenges that people face when they are in academia and when they're people of color are massive. These are challenges on academic freedom. These are challenges with regard to promotions, with regard to just being able to be treated the same way as your colleagues. And for many people, there are such great safety risks that you need to integrate academia into the broader movement so that there is a cushion to fall back on, so that there is solidarity, there's community support to fall back on. And I think gradually we are finding ways to treat these critiques less as theoretical critiques and more as practical practical ways to think about change. And it's very nice to see that happen here in Europe, see that happen in the UK, in the US. It'll take ages, but I think the marriage between academia and critiquing efforts outside of academia is very important. Very, very important to break those walls, to come out of those ivory towers and speak with people who are your interlocutors, actually.
Thank you very much for your response. And I think I've asked you this question, but I'll ask it again because it's been such a long time. In your opinion, do you think higher education breaks the poverty cycle, or do you think actually, no, it doesn't?
I actually feel like it entrenches lots of the inequalities you see within your micro networks, your micro societies. There are some brilliant pieces by, I think a recent one I read was by Sumit Samos on the sort of demographic of people who study in Oxford. And you see that these are all upper caste Indians, all people from elite families who are able to muster up the resources to study in these institutions. And it is these people then who progress to more powerful positions. So in a way, the same hierarchy that you are located in within your country replicates. It continues, it extends once you move out of the country. So there are actually very few higher educational institutions which have been able to challenge that, which have been able to reverse hierarchies, which have been able to challenge dynamics, or in any way offer corrections to these hierarchies. I know that there are some institutions in India which have managed to do this. I think in India, in Asia and Africa, there are more institutions which are sensitive to corrective justice as opposed to outside. But I think educational institutions oftentimes are really complicit and in fact drive discrimination, intensify discrimination much more for people who already come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds.
That is a really, really good point. And, I hope someone who's listening, they get it, because I think that is so important. And it goes back to what we were saying about Gandhi, to say, okay, he's gone to Oxford University and then he comes back and it's like a whole movement. You've read something that we haven't read clearly and you're able to articulate yourself and, it becomes a thing. Not to discredit Gandhi, it's just an example. I guess that, in terms of everything that we've actually touched on, you touched on how Black people have gone through abuse as well as Asian people. But, in terms of the model that was used, you had Caucasians, then you had Asians, mixed race, and then you had Black people at the bottom, essentially, with indigenous people. And that's inclusive of Indians in the US or in Cuba, etc. We get the pyramid scheme here. And I guess, what I'm trying to get to is to understand what your thoughts are, because in my opinion, I feel like with equality, diversity, inclusion, to go back to the previous question and to what you've just said in terms of universities, I feel like as long as you've suffered, we need a movement for those people. But we shouldn't have Asian lives matter. We shouldn't have Black lives matter. We shouldn't have indigenous people's lives matter. Give us back our land, we're fighting against you, and go into the same courtroom that belongs to a certain group.
Right.
Do you get what I mean? And with the human rights, like you said, it's all westernized. So essentially what I'm trying to get to is, what is your opinion? Because this is your work and, you're working with a group that's very spiritual. Now, to have a KPI of spiritualism is quite difficult. And to understand spiritualism is difficult because I have my own perceptions, viewpoints, etc. As we all know. What are your thoughts? This is a very big question, I know, but, it would be nice to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right that you need cross-community solidarity, cross-community mobilization, because cross-community mobilization is far more powerful than other, solo mobilizations. And, you see this right from the time of the NAACP and the drafting of the UN Charter. These mobilization efforts have been going on now for 70 years, right? Ambedkar and Du Bois used to have communications where they would talk about Afro-Dalit solidarities. At the same time, while it's important for corrective justice for everyone, I think it's important for each of us to recognize how we are perpetuating violence against someone else. We may be disadvantaged, but we are part of a cycle where we perpetuate violence on someone else. And the clearest examples of this I got when I was doing fieldwork, because, I'm upper caste and I entered fieldwork with a lot of trepidation because I knew that, it's people like me who oftentimes do fieldwork with oppressed castes, extract their knowledge and then vanish, right? It's parachute journalism, parachute academia, like you call it. You speak to a community, learn about their traditional knowledge, you use the traditional knowledge, you benefit, but you never give anything back to the community. So it was very clear when I started fieldwork that in the cycle, I was the oppressor and this community was the oppressed. But when I started speaking to the community, I realized that the casteism that, victimizes them, they also practice it on other communities. So, for example, this community they are recognized as scheduled tribe. Now, scheduled tribe is one of the constitutional categories for which recognizes that you have been historically marginalized, amongst others. And there are communities such as the Dalits who exist even below this community in the caste hierarchy. And funnily, you'll see that this community will say, we work at their houses. We cook food for them, we wash their vessels, but we won't eat the food they make. We won't marry our daughters into those houses. We won't live with them. If someone from that community joins our festival, then our festival is polluted. They practice the same sort of pollution, contamination, casteism narratives that afflict violence on them. So we're all part of this cycle, right? And just like that, I think it's important for Indians, people of color, to recognize that we have been very complicit in the violence against Black people. And also that none of these categories are homogeneous. I mean, not to say that, it's Indians who are living in India necessarily, but Indians in Uganda, Indians in Tanzania, there are lots of dynamics there where you see that Indians are part of the systems that afflict violence on Black people. And it's important for us to realize that. So when it is time to eat resources, we are able to prioritize the people who need those resources most. I think So in effect, my position is that definitely mobilize together. But when it is time to allocate resources, think about who falls where and go in that order.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your opinion. And you'll be glad to know that this is the last question. So, you were a guest previously and you're back again. So, in your opinion, do you think PhD Hard Talk is actually a good platform for people like you and I, and also for people who want to get into research and for universities alike, because you are disseminating your work? So, you've started there. And secondly, it's like practice for survivors as well, because you're able to think and see where, there may be gaps or where you may have over exaggerated and you reel yourself back in. We're learning from each other, essentially. So what is your take on PhD Hard Talk?
Yeah, it's good you asked, because I think at least for me to have these conversations, it really helps to speak ideas into existence, because otherwise PhDs can be really solitary processes. And you sometimes don't have a check about which direction you're moving in, your own positionality. It's only when you speak to others, when people question you, when people are interested in your work and start teasing out things that may have been obvious to you but are not obvious to everyone else, that you have the reminder to be grounded, to take stock again and just assess where you are. And to see whether your work has that relevance, whether your work translates to people who are in this broader community of academia. I think increasingly we are in a market where one cannot be too specialized. You can't have that. You can't sit in an echo chamber, write your one project, and then expect that everyone will know about you, everyone will recognize, will contact you, and suddenly your work will have relevance beyond your discipline, beyond your area, beyond your university. That doesn't happen anymore. You really do have to place yourself in conversation. And I think PhD Hard Talk does that very well. Not only placing, putting the spotlight on people who are doing work and showing how their work is important to people outside of the discipline, generally to the wider communities. But also, like you said, connecting people who are doing different research, who are doing similar research, who may come from similar countries, and allowing for more sharing of opportunities. I think as early career researchers, something we often struggle with is to find out where these conferences are happening, or who's going, where are you going, how do you know how to apply. And when you create these networks, it's easier to share opportunities that may benefit someone else. And you start thinking less about PhDs as solitary practices, and more about yourself as an academic citizen, as a larger community of people who are in the service of academia, and you're one of them. So you have responsibilities, you have sharing responsibilities towards others, and keeps reminding you about these things. So I think in that sense, I really sort of appreciate the work that PhD Hard Talk is doing, and also this idea of following up. So you can give people the chance to track their own progress, and to update others about where they are heading in newer directions or older directions, whatever they may be. Yeah.
Thank you so much again for saying yes and coming back and sharing. I think your journey from, like you explained, to say I started in Kashmir, but now I'm here, and it's okay, it's a part of the journey. That's what makes it exciting, because I think, the biggest challenge that we have as PhD students or researchers is that our mental health is often affected because people ask us questions and sometimes we don't have the answers, and sometimes we do, but we're not sure if it's the right answer. And for you to come out to say, I've gone through this process and I'm still okay, actually, and I'm looking forward to doing this project. It's amazing to hear. So thank you very much. And I'd like to say to people at home, if you do want to get in contact with Raghavi, all the details are at the bottom. The link to your LinkedIn, your socials is at the bottom, and your email address. And also in regards to publications, we'll share the links at the bottom. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and hashtag Project Dissemination to the world, and hashtag Sustainable Knowledge to the world. Thank you so much, Raghavi, again, and thank you to everyone at home for watching.